Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Hayes. I'm the engagement lead for CReDo and we're on the home straight, so only an hour and 10 until it's drinks time. So stay with it everyone. So today I want to talk to you about CReDo, the Climate Resilience Demonstrator Project, and this morning you saw the film. And this is level 1. We're talking about industry challenges. So I want to talk to you about CReDo and the industry challenges that are relevant to CReDo and how we've been addressing those industry challenges. So the biggest challenge that we all face is climate change, and how do we adapt to climate change? And I think we're beginning to understand that we're not ready for it. We're not ready for the kind of extreme weather events that we're going to see in the future caused by climate change. And there are a number of organisations who are saying this very publicly. So there are a number of reports coming out from the National Infrastructure Commission, the Committee on Climate Change, and the Joint Committee on National Security Strategy. And they are saying we are not ready for these future storms and we need to act now. The Committee on Climate Change has been saying this for a while. They're saying we have a low level of understanding of our infrastructure interdependencies and we need to do something about it. So the main industry challenges that I want to talk about this afternoon are addressing this. So how do we get a coordinated understanding of infrastructure interdependencies? How do we share data across sectors? We all know this is a challenge. We're talking about it all day. And how do we enable coordinated strategic resilience planning and investment? So CReDo is a climate change adaptation digital twin. We bring together data across energy, water and telecoms networks. We work with Anglian Water, with BT and Openreach and with UK Power Networks who bring their people and their data to this project. So when we bring together data about assets, we can start to see the connections between the infrastructure networks and we can start to identify the interdependencies across the networks. And in CReDo so far, we've been looking at the impact of flooding caused by extreme weather events in the future across the infrastructure system. So in the CReDo digital twin, we're able to understand when assets fail. And we take those wet failed assets and we propagate the failure across the whole system so that you can see in these flood scenarios, you can see which assets fail and how that failure propagates across the whole system. So you can see as a result of a storm which causes flooding, which assets are failing because they are wet, but which assets are also failing which are in areas that are dry because they are dependent on wet failed assets. So it's really helping us to think about this sort of these bigger questions about how do we prepare for these storms in advance, and if we had a live data connection, how could we respond in an emergency situation? So it's really helping us think about these big questions about how do we increase system resilience and how do we adapt to climate change. So in terms of helping this coordinated understanding of infrastructure interdependencies, we found that developing a visualization is really helpful because you can start to see the dependencies across the network. And here, for example, we have this visualization which is available on the DT Hub. You can go on, you can have a play around with it, but you can start to see that there's one asset that's highlighted on the left-hand side. It's a primary power substation. And it turns out that many other assets fail because they are dependent on this particular substation, and that causes the failure across the whole system. So just the tool of visualization helps us identify that. And I also want to say something about using synthetic data. So in CReDo, we've had to work with confidential asset data. And what we found really useful is being able to develop synthetic data so we can put this up in public, we can tell the story very publicly about what we're doing in CReDo. So that's helping us to develop our coordinated understanding of infrastructure interdependencies. Now, I talked about confidential asset data. How are we sharing data across the organisations? And we've been on a journey of learning here in CReDo. So in phase 1, we did what a lot of projects tend to do when they're under time pressure. we took the data and we put it into one central place. We put it into a central database. And that was helpful because it enabled us to look after the data, because we had a strict data license, so we had to ensure that we looked after the data and kept it secure. But the problem that we faced with this central database is that because we'd kept the data so secure, we hadn't had time to develop the right technical security authentication processes so that we could then share the insights back with the asset owners. And of course, that's the whole point of CReDo, is to share those insights back with the asset owners. So that was our problem number one. Problem number two was, with a central database, it worked well with the data sets we already had. But if we wanted to start to scale CReDo to other asset owners, to other sectors, to other users, and we wanted to start to bring their data into CReDo, we were going to have a problem with scaling. So with a central database, you're going to have a problem, limits to scaling. So the problem that we're faced with is, how are we going to scale this up to other sectors and to other asset owners? So what we started to explore in phase 2 is the development of a distributed architecture. So here we have asset owners are able to keep control of their data, and the CReDo digital twin is able to access that data through a central node, and it brings it into CReDo, it runs it through the models, and then it is able to share the insights back with the asset owners. Because in this second stage, we were able to develop those technical security authentication processes which enable us to share the insights back with the asset owners. For us, it was very much about getting the right agreements in place and the right processes so that we could access the data, run it through the models, and then share it back with the asset owners. And with the distributed architecture, it enables us to be able to scale up, so we can start to bring in other sectors and other asset owners. And that's really, really important for us to be able to explore in the future. So that's some progress we're making on data sharing. It's a big challenge. I'm not standing up here and trying to say we've solved all these challenges, we've solved all these problems. We've made some small steps on this journey, and we've learnt quite a few things. And I think it's really important that we share these learnings very widely with the whole community. So in terms of strategic resilience investment planning, we've always had a vision with CReDo that we would be able to use CReDo to be able to understand what the impact of different interventions would be across the infrastructure system. So asset owners want to be able to understand what happens if I make this investment relative to another investment. So the idea here is that you'll be able to understand, well, what if I relocated a power substation outside of the flood zone? What would the impact be on resilience? And of course, because it's an expensive thing to do to relocate a power substation to another area, you'd want to investigate other options. So you'd want to be able to look at, well, what happens if I install some extra backup generators or some increased flood protection around other assets? You'd want to be able to understand the impact of different interventions. And you'd want to be able to weigh it up in terms of the relative cost, relative carbon impact, and the level of resilience that different interventions will deliver. And I think what's been interesting for us is it enables asset owners and regulators, hopefully, to start moving from thinking about network resilience to system resilience. And so, for example, you might have a water company who says, well, actually, I see that it's better for me as a water company to invest in power sector resilience rather than my own water network assets, because I'm so dependent on the power network. And I think this idea of system resilience is really important, and we're very keen to continue that conversation with asset owners and with regulators. How do we get to a place where we're able to incentivize system resilience and investment across the system? And so you see here with the asset owners are able to access the CReDo because we've got the right agreements in place. They're able to have that system level view, and they're able to identify which are the assets that are most critical to them across the whole system, and therefore, how might they pool that investment to invest in some of those major assets? So I think, again, back to the visual element, it helps to see it, to be able to plan ahead. So I've just given you a very quick tour of CReDo, and as I say, with regard to strategic resilience planning and investment, we're just sort of scratching the surface here, and I'm not trying to say that CReDo has solved these problems in any way, but I think we have started to make progress. We've really sort of we've started to sort of go on that journey and tackle some of these problems and share our learnings. And what's been really important to us throughout all of this is collaboration. So having input and involvement from the asset owners has been fundamental to this project. Having the academic community involved, the research community, and support from government has been so important in making CReDo work. And where we're at in our journey, so we originally launched under the Centre for Digital Built Britain and the Digital Twin Hub back in March 2021. And I think it's absolutely brilliant that Connected Places Catapult has been able to take CReDo forward over the last year and has got it to the place where we're at now, where we've been able to put in bids for innovation funding with the regulators, with Ofwat and Ofgem. And we are hoping to put in further bids for other sources of innovation funding, because that's the direction we want to be able to go in, is to keep CReDo going and to source the right kind of funding to do that. So on that, with the Ofgem Strategic Innovation Fund, so we've just completed the discovery phase, which is a short phase for CReDo. It's just a 2-month project, which is looking at developing a digital elicitation tool. So it's looking at how assets fail, when they fail, when extreme weather conditions affect them. It's turning that process of finding out how assets are impacted, which can be quite a lengthy, in-depth process. It's taking that process and digitalising it. So it means that this kind of process can be undertaken not just within UK power networks, but ultimately this tool is developed and rolled out across other energy networks across the whole UK. And in the CReDo Plus discovery phase, we've been also looking at the feasibility of expanding into extreme heat, because that's what asset owners are keen to understand, is how extreme heat will impact our networks in the future. And we're currently putting together a bid for alpha phase, so we hope that that work will continue. And on the water side, we were fortunate enough to be awarded a year's worth of catalyst funding from Ofwat. And so on the water side of things, this is also looking at extreme heat. This is a problem that asset owners are very much concerned about. So what we need here is climate data, climate models. We need to understand what extreme heat will look like in the future, what will the weather forecast will be. And we also then need to understand, back to these asset failure models, how our assets will be impacted by extreme heat. So there will be work over the following year looking at how assets in the water network will be affected by extreme heat. And back to this point about collaboration, what's been really important for us is sort of this complementary funding. So on the energy side and on the water side, it's been brilliant to get funding from the regulators, and we really hope that that will continue. And of course, across other networks and water networks as well. But we don't want to do just energy and water. We want to continue with work in telecoms. We want to expand out to transport and explore the different use cases across transport. And we want to look at the regulatory use case as well, how we might share data with the regulators with the right agreements in place. And I think this is all part of our bigger journey towards connected digital twins, so that we can share data across sectors, across organisations, through some sort of ecosystem distributed architecture that we all need to develop. So we all need to be thinking about how we can develop the common access, security and quality protocols that we need to share data in a seamless and secure way. And if you're keen to get involved in CReDo, there's lots of information on the Digital Twin Hub. Come and get in touch with me, come and talk to us. Come and talk to the CReDo team. We have a booth downstairs on the ground floor. So please get in touch and come and talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have had a few questions from online, so I'm going to start in no particular order with the oldest one. What do you think would be the best way, do you think, to get data sharing agreements set up in a matter of weeks in the future for similar projects like CReDo, do you think?
We need model agreements, standard agreements that people can take and adapt. I think there will always be some element of bespoke, but you need those standard agreements that people can say, okay, this has worked for X amount of projects. You kind of need that precedent. That kind of builds trust amongst the different parties. Say it's worked in, it's worked for NUR, it's worked for CReDo, it's worked for other projects. So a template agreement that you can then adjust for your and tailor it to your specific purposes.
Great. So they're learning from the experience that you gathered, all of that knowledge people can be making use of.
Yeah, so originally we had a template data exploration license that UK Power Network shared with the group, and we used that and we adapted it to the purposes of the project. But I think we need more standard templates for people to pick up and use, because there's no point everyone going through that same process and reinventing the wheel.
They'll all be creating their own wheels from the scratch, won't they? So digital twins are created in some situations to avoid relocations in the long term, ? In the morning sessions, the power network is under pressure of generating energy. Will digital twins create additional energy consumption, even though conceptually there are reasons to not relocate assets?
I think this is an important point. What's the environmental impact of all the data that we're creating and using? We're on this digital journey. We do need to be aware of what the environmental impact is. And I think that's where it's important to think maybe about the data sharing architecture. So if we are creating lots of central databases, we're creating multiple copies of the same set of data. And think about how much energy that uses to store all these central databases. Whereas if we have some kind of distributed architecture where we're able to access the data that we need and not necessarily make all these multiple copies, I think that's one element. But I think this is something that needs to be addressed. We haven't got the answers, and it needs to be part of the overall equation.
Okay, excellent. Well, they are now coming in thick and fast as they do those questions. Miranda Sharp asks, what does the benefits case for CReDo look like?
So the benefits case, so far we looked at the impact of extreme weather events, so flooding across the infrastructure system. And Frontier Economics did some work for us, and they estimated, they carried out a simulation, and the order of magnitude was between 80 to 186 million between now and 2050 in terms of benefits. So it's a kind of an order of magnitude. It is hard to put a finger on the exact number, but it gives you an idea that the benefits are significant. And that was only just for surface water flooding. Oh. So if you start to look at other types of flooding and you think about extreme heat, that number is going to get larger. And also if you start to include transport as well, then the number would be even larger. So it is difficult to value resilience, and that's a problem at the moment. I think it's being better recognised within government right now that we don't well understand resilience, and I think that the Treasury and other organisations are realising we actually need to do some work to understand what the economics of resilience are and how do we measure resilience.
So I don't know if we have time for one last one, or a little bit tighter. The next most voted one there is a great project with lots of learning. What would be your number one takeaway for other types of asset owners trying to connect up across sectors?
I should have that ready prepared, shouldn't I?
Yeah, sure. You can do, well, the data standards question is the next one there.
It's collaboration and trust. I think when you start working with other organisations, you're going to build that level of trust, and it's an iterative process. And I think if you get together to solve one problem, so you get together to start talking about climate resilience, for example, you can start to talk about other problems as well. And I think a neat thing with water, energy, telecoms was we were talking about climate resilience, but then suddenly it was relevant to talk about fibre in water. So communications networks, if you've already got a contact in Anglian Water, for example, it's easier to start to make that connection. So for me, it really is about people talking to each other, starting to form teams to solve particular problems and building upon that.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah Hayes, everybody.